For years, Washington has repeated the same story. Donald Trump gives the orders, Republicans fall in line. No hesitation, no resistance, no consequences. But this week, that story cracked. Not with a scandal, not with chaos, but with votes. In a Congress controlled by his own party, Trump lost twice. Back to back, quietly, and that is what makes it dangerous. House Republicans crossed the aisle to revive healthcare subsidies they allowed to expire. Then, in the Senate, members of Trump's party moved to limit his military actions in Venezuela, a rare bipartisan rebuke. These were not dramatic rebellions. No speeches, no walkouts. There was something subtler and far more revealing. They signaled erosion, a weakening grip, a system beginning to push back. If you want to understand how power really fades, not loudly, but structurally this moment matters, stay with me. Because to see what's actually happening, we have to look beneath the headlines. The real question is not whether Donald Trump is losing power. He isn't, at least not yet. The real question is this: why now? Why, after years of near total obedience, did cracks suddenly appear inside a Republican-controlled Congress? The common explanation is personality, egos, tempers, private grudges. That explanation is wrong. This is not about anger. It is about incentives. Trump's authority has always rested on fear and reward. Fear of his base, reward through political survival. But Congress is not a rally. It is an institution, and institutions respond to pressure differently. Healthcare subsidies affect real voters. War powers affect constitutional responsibility. Midterm elections affect careers. When those forces collide, loyalty becomes conditional. What we are seeing is not rebellion. It is calculation. Lawmakers quietly testing boundaries, measuring consequences, preparing for a future that may not revolve around one man. This is how power shifts in democracies. Not overnight, not loudly, but step by step. And to understand why these steps matter, we need to look at how this dynamic was built in the first place. To understand this moment, we need context, history, patterns. Trump's dominance did not appear overnight. It followed a familiar political cycle. In periods of polarization, parties centralize power. Leaders become symbols. Symbols become shields. After Trump's return to power, Republicans closed ranks. Primary threats loomed. The base demanded loyalty. Defiance felt suicidal. At the same time, institutions weakened. Norms bent. Congress deferred. Speed replaced deliberation. But political cycles always turn. As elections approach, incentives shift. Risk tolerance drops. Voters become less abstract and more personal. Healthcare is no longer a talking point. It is premiums, bills, coverage lapsing on January 1st. Foreign policy is no longer rhetoric. It is military force, legal authority, responsibility. This is the phase where institutions reassert themselves, not because they suddenly grow brave, but because survival demands it. Trump's grip was built in a moment of fear. This moment is different. And that difference sets the stage for the first real shock. The first shock came quietly, but its implications were loud. In the House, Republicans faced a simple choice: party loyalty or voter reality. Affordable Care Act subsidies had expired on January 1st. That meant higher costs, less coverage, real pain. Democrats forced the issue with a discharge petition, a procedural tool, rarely successful, often symbolic. This time, it worked. 17 Republicans crossed the line. Not radicals, not rebels, pragmatists. They voted to revive healthcare benefits their own party had allowed to lapse. This was not ideological conversion. It was electoral math. Healthcare touches millions. It cuts across ideology. It shows up in kitchen table conversations. For these lawmakers, loyalty suddenly carried a price tag. And it was too high. If you think this was just a technical vote, look again. This is how pressure enters a system. Through procedure, through necessity. And if moments like this surprise you, that's exactly why they matter. They happen when no one is shouting. But this was only the opening act, because the second shock would go further and hit closer to the core of presidential power. The second shock exposed something deeper, not policy. Power itself. In the Senate, the issue was war, not rhetoric, authority. A bipartisan group advanced a war powers resolution. Its purpose was simple: to limit U.S. military actions in Venezuela without congressional approval. This was not symbolic defiance. It was constitutional friction. For years, Congress has surrendered war powers quietly. Presidents act, lawmakers complain, nothing changes. This time, something did. 5 Republican senators broke ranks. They voted to restrain a president from their own party. Why does this matter? Because war powers sit at the core of executive authority. When Congress challenges that, it is not posturing, it is reclaiming ground. Trump understood the signal immediately. His response was not measured. It was furious, public condemnation, threats to political careers, a demand for absolute loyalty. But that reaction revealed the truth. When power is unquestioned, it does not need to shout. When it feels threatened, it does. This vote did not change policy overnight, but it changed something more important. It showed that obedience is no longer automatic. And once that line is crossed, the system behaves differently. Now the consequences begin to ripple outward. Now, let me bring this closer to you, because power struggles in Washington are never abstract. They land somewhere. On real lives, if you are a voter, these shifts matter, even if you don't follow politics closely, even if you are tired of it. Healthcare votes decide whether coverage disappears overnight. War powers votes decide whether military force expands without consent. These are not elite debates. They are personal. When lawmakers start breaking ranks, it means they are listening again, not to party leaders, but to consequences. And here is the uncomfortable truth. For years, many politicians believed you would accept anything, any cost, any escalation, as long as it wore the right party label. That assumption is cracking. You may feel powerless, but your pressure is showing up in votes, quietly, indirectly, effectively. If this analysis helps you see the system more clearly, pause for a moment, share it, talk about it. These conversations matter more than outrage ever did, because when citizens disengage, power hardens. When they pay attention, power adapts. And this shift is not staying contained inside Washington. Its effects are already spreading outward. What happens in Washington rarely stays in Washington, especially when power begins to fracture. Allies watch closely. So do adversaries. When Congress signals limits on military action, the message travels fast. Uncertainty replaces predictability. Signals become mixed. In Venezuela, this matters. U.S. military posture affects regional stability. Markets, diplomacy, escalation risks. Globally, something else is happening. The image of unchecked American executive power is softening, not collapsing, but recalibrating. For years, presidents acted first and explained later. Now, legislatures are reasserting themselves cautiously, selectively. This changes calculations abroad. It slows decisions. It introduces doubt. Some see this as weakness. Others see it as balance returning. But here is the key point. When internal constraints resurface, foreign policy becomes less impulsive and more contested. That contest is messy, but it is also democratic. And as the world adjusts to this shift, one question looms larger than all others. Where does this trajectory lead? So let's look ahead, not with certainty, but with structure. There are three plausible paths from here. The first is stabilization. Trump absorbs the signal. Congress pushes back selectively. Power finds a new equilibrium. In this scenario, symbolic defeats continue, but core authority remains intact. The system bends. It does not break. The second path is gradual erosion. More lawmakers defect, not loudly. Strategically, votes become conditional. Loyalty becomes transactional. Trump remains central, but no longer absolute. This is the most likely outcome. Slow, uneven, politically exhausting. The third path is escalation. Trump doubles down, punishes dissent, forces loyalty tests. That approach can work briefly, but it accelerates resistance and hardens institutional pushback. History tells us something important. Strong men rarely fall in dramatic moments. They weaken through accumulation of limits, of losses, of defiance that once seemed impossible. Which path emerges will not be decided by speeches or social media posts. It will be decided by incentives, elections, fear, self-preservation. And that brings us to the final insight. Power rarely disappears all at once. It leaks, not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet votes, procedural defeats, moments that barely trend. That is what this week revealed. Trump is still powerful, but power that must be enforced is no longer absolute. Power that faces limits is no longer alone. What we are witnessing is not collapse. It is exposure. Exposure of incentives, exposure of fear, exposure of a system remembering how to push back. As midterm elections approach, this will accelerate. Careers will matter more than loyalty, voters more than rhetoric, institutions more than personalities. And this is the larger lesson. Democracies do not correct themselves through outrage. They correct through pressure, through attention, through participation. If you want to understand where American politics is heading, don't watch the speeches. Watch the votes. If this helped you see the system more clearly, share it. Stay curious. Stay engaged. Because the next chapter of this story is already being written. Quietly, right now, and I'll be here to help you read it.